All right, Rabosai, good morning. Let us begin. So we are continuing this morning in Eretz Hashem in Tzidkas Hatzaddik Os Ayin Hey. We began this particular Os yesterday. I'm sorry. Okay, we began this particular Os yesterday, and Reb Tzaddik introduced us to what I think is really fascinating idea. I wanna fine tune it a little bit from yesterday. So Reb Tzaddik introduced us to this concept that when a person commits an aveira in the Rebbe's lashon, that aveira is viewed as davar mikri, is viewed as episodic or happenstance, and ultimately again does not fundamentally affect what he calls a kinyan atzmi. Because it's mikri, because it's episodic, it does not create a kinyan atzmi, a personalistic acquisition. Meaning what? Reb Tzaddik is saying is like this. Now, somebody called me yesterday after Shir, and they said this seems to go against everything we've always learned. Right? We always learn that what we do shapes who we are, and what we do has an impact on who we are. So how could Reb Tzaddik say that a chait doesn't become part of who I am? So remember, what Reb Tzaddik is trying to highlight is the following idea. It is true, everything we do affects who we are, and everything we do leaves a residual effect on our self. What Reb Tzaddik is saying is as follows, that chait does not go ahead and fundamentally erode my inner core. There's an inner core that is always kaddish. There's an inner core that's always holy. There's an inner core that cannot be tainted by chait. Does chait leave an impact on me? Of course it does. Of course it does. Does it impact aspects of self? 1,000%. Everything we do shapes who we are. But there's always a little piece of me that remains untainted. There's a piece, we'll call it a personalistic self, that remains unimpacted by chait, that retains its kedusha. That's the piece of me, that's a piece of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that can really never be tainted. Remember, we have to accept this premise, because it's this premise that serves as the source for tshuva. Right? If I believed that chait fundamentally undermines me in totality, and that chait taints everything, then by definition, there's no ability to do tshuva. Because the ability to do tshuva has to start with some nitzutz, some spark of kedusha. If there's nothing that's there, then at the end of the day, there's no platform, there's no springboard, there's nothing to start from. So that's what Reb Tzaddik is saying. He's saying that therefore chait ultimately at the end of the day is eino kinyan atzmi. It's not kinyan atzmi. So I want to go on. If we're on page Kuf Ayin Vav, so Reb Tzaddik says, "Ulakach yesh lan pediya." Therefore, again, there is the ability to redeem one's self from sin. Now, of course, the most basic example of pidyon would be tshuva. Why is tshuva possible? Tshuva is possible because I believe that at the end of the day, chait does not fundamentally tarnish my entire self. I believe that at the end of the day, chait does not go ahead and totally undermine who and what I am. Therefore, there's redemption. Now he says something beautiful. I read this yesterday, but it's kedai to repeat it. Kimosha kazuv v'hu yifta es Yisrael mikol avonosav. Ultimately, again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will redeem Klal Yisrael from all of their averas. Now, I never thought about this before. We say this pasuk all of the time in Kuf Lamed and Tehillim. What do you mean v'hu yifta es Yisrael? He will redeem Klal Yisrael from their sins. What does that lashon mean? What should it say? V'hu yislach l'chol avonosav. Right? Meaning, the idea over here is we want forgiveness. The idea over here is that I want HaKadosh Baruch Hu to forgive me for all of my transgressions. What do you mean v'hu yifta? What is the lashon of pidyon, of redemption? And the Rebbe here says something truly beautiful. He says, "Ukimo davar shenis kadesh rak b'kedushas damim she'ein gufo kadosh ela shavyav sheyesh la pidyon." Listen to what the Rebbe says, and this is so profound. He says, "What's pidyon? What's pidyon? What does it mean to redeem something?" So he says, "Pidyon is when you take a simple example. I go ahead and have an item that belongs to the Beis HaMikdash, right? A piece of wood that belongs to the Beis HaMikdash. I would like to use that piece of wood to build myself a deck. That's what I want to do. Can I do it? Can I do it? No. It's called me'ilah. But what can I do? I can go ahead and redeem. There's a concept of pidyon. I could redeem that piece of wood by going ahead and paying its value to the Beis HaMikdash. And then what happens? The identity, I should say in this case, the sanctity of the beam is removed and put onto the money. Removed from the beam, put onto the money. Now, why is one able to do that? Why is that possible? Why is that possible? Because the beam is not kula kadosh. Right? The beam doesn't have complete and total sanctity. What does the beam have? We've learned this. What does the beam have? Kedushas domim, financial sanctity. And because it's only financial sanctity and not what we'll call total sanctity, the sanctity can be removed from the beam and placed onto the money. So Tzaddik says something absolutely amazing. When I sin, when I commit an Avera, what happens? What happens? See, I both say, before you opened up Reb Tzaddik, you would assume that what happens when you sin? What happens when you sin? You become a sinner. That's what happens when you sin, right? When you sin, you become a sinner, which means what? That the chait itself defines the totality of who I am. I'm now a sinner. And the more I sin, the more reinforced that identity becomes. Reb Tzaddik says, David HaMelech uses a lashon of, V'hu yifte es Yisrael mikol avonosav. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I could be redeemed from my sin. What do you mean I could be redeemed? The same way that the beam can be redeemed from the Beis HaMikdash, because the sanctity of the beam is not total, right? It's not complete. It's just, quote unquote, Kedushas Damim. There's a layer of sanctity that's there, but that sanctity can be removed. Lahavdil, when I sin and I commit an Avera, there is a layer of chait that sits upon me. There's a layer of chait that I've now existed. Does that chait overtake me in totality? Absolutely not. It sits there on my soul. It sits there on my heart. It sits there on my identity. But it doesn't overtake everything. And therefore what? I can be redeemed from it. Isn't it incredible, Pshat? There's a concept of pidyon by chait. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, be podem me, redeem me. Because you know this is not who I am. This might be, I might have done some really bad things, right? And I certainly have to figure out why I did that, how I did it, and the impact the residual impact it leaves on me, but it doesn't take over me in totality. It doesn't define me in totality. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, be podem me. Go ahead and redeem me from my sins. The fact that redemption is possible means that sin does not color my persona in totality. It is like a layer that sits on top of me that I need to be redeemed. It's just such an incredible and overwhelming yesod. Now, conversely, I'll point out over here, if you take a look in footnote Reish Tzadik Vav, he says something so beautiful here. He says, Re'ei ma shekasav Rabbeinu b'Pri Tzadik. So he's quoting over here from Reb Tzaddik in Pri Tzadik, who says, Yachel Yisrael el Hashem, ki ha'im Hashem ha'chesed v'harbe imo fidus. V'harbe imo fidus. So says the Medrash, the Medrash, Shemoshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom niskasha b'machtzis hashekel. Moshe Rabbeinu could not understand the concept of machtzis hashekel. Rashi quotes this. Now, what couldn't Moshe understand about machtzis hashekel, the half shekel contribution? Ki kol asher leish yitain ba'ad nafsho, ve'heich yuchal ha'adam litain kofer upidyon nafsho b'davar katan kazeh. So it says, remember again, the whole, what is machtzis hashekel? So we often think of machtzis hashekel ultimately as a mechanism for taking a census, right? You can't count Jews directly, so you take a census to machtzis hashekel. That's partially true, but remember again, how does the Torah in Parshas Ki Sisa describe the machtzis hashekel? It's a pidyon nafsho, a redemption for your soul. Pidyon nafsho. Now, again, Rashi says, how is it a pidyon nafsho? Because remember, what would they do with machtzis hashekel? Let's remember this from our shkalim days. What would they do with machtzis hashekel? Tiklin chadatin. Remember again, they would buy karbanos sivor. So the pidyon nafsho comes in the form of the fact that ultimately, again, we purchase karbanos. Karbanos are used to affect a level of atonement. Reb Tzaddik says, in its essence, machtzis hashekel was there as an atonement for Klal Yisrael for their averos. Moshe, so the Medrash says Niskasha Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand the Machzas HaShekel. So I will say, so says Reb Tzaddik, what's the pshat that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand the Machzas HaShekel? He didn't understand how one mitzvah could redeem a person from chait. You see, Reb Tzaddik says Moshe Rabbeinu assumed that when you make a mistake in life, that mistake totally and wholly and completely defines you. Are you not hearing me on Zoom? Okay. Oh, there's no sound. Okay, Jeremy, I think this thing died. Okay. All right, we'll stop over for today. We'll pick up in Hashem Moshe Rabbeinu tomorrow, on Monday.